A toddler noticed a German shepherd being kicked out of a shop. What baby did next left everyone in tears. What happened next will leave you speechless and questioning everything you thought you knew about the bond between children and animals. Before we begin this incredible story that you're about to listen to, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The rain fell in gentle drops that Thursday afternoon, creating tiny rivers along the cracked sidewalks of Millbrook's main street. Most people hurried past the small grocery store with their heads down, umbrellas clutched tight against the October chill. But 5-year-old Mia Chen wasn't like most people. She had a way of noticing things others missed, and today, what she noticed would change everything. Mia walked slowly beside her grandmother, her small hand wrapped around the woman's weathered fingers. Grandma Rose had promised her a special treat from Peterson's corner store, and Mia's eyes sparkled with excitement despite the gray sky above. Her bright yellow raincoat made her look like a tiny sunbeam against the dull afternoon, and her black hair peeked out from under her hood in soft curls. "Can we get the cookies with the sprinkles, Grandma?" Mia asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of rain hitting the pavement. "Of course, sweetheart, but only if you promise to share with your baby brother when we get home," Rose replied, squeezing Mia's hand gently. That's when they heard it, a harsh voice cutting through the peaceful sound of rainfall like a knife through silk. "Get out! I told you before, no dirty mutts in my store!" Mia stopped walking so suddenly that Grandma Rose nearly stumbled. There, just outside Peterson's corner store, a large German shepherd was being roughly shoved out the front door. The dog's coat was soaked, matted with mud and rain, and his dark eyes held a sadness that seemed too deep for any animal to carry. "I don't care if he's friendly," the store owner, Mr. Peterson, shouted as he gave the dog another push with his foot. "He's scaring my customers. Go find somewhere else to beg for scraps." The German shepherd didn't fight back. He simply lowered his head and limped away from the door, his right hind leg clearly injured. Water dripped from his thick coat, and with each step he left small puddles mixed with what looked like blood. Mia's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen anything so heartbreaking in her young life. The dog wasn't aggressive or threatening. He was just tired, hurt, and looking for shelter from the rain. But instead of kindness, he had found cruelty. "Grandma," Mia whispered, tugging on Rose's coat, "look at the doggy." Rose followed her granddaughter's gaze and sighed. "Oh, honey, that's very sad, but we can't help every stray animal we see. Come on, let's get your cookies before the store closes." But Mia didn't move. She stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching as the German shepherd tried to find a dry spot under the narrow awning of the adjacent building. Other people walked past without so much as a glance. Some even crossed the street to avoid the large dog entirely. "Grandma, he's bleeding," Mia said, her voice stronger now, "and he's all alone." Rose looked more carefully and saw that Mia was right. The dog's paw was cut, and a thin line of blood mixed with the rainwater beneath him. Her heart ached, but she was practical. They couldn't take in every hurt animal they encountered. "Sweetheart, sometimes animals get hurt, and it's very sad. But we have to be careful around dogs we don't know," Rose explained gently. Mia nodded, but her eyes never left the German shepherd. Something about him called to her in a way she couldn't explain. It wasn't just pity she felt, it was recognition, as if she knew this dog somehow, as if he had been waiting for her specifically. Without warning, Mia pulled her hand free from her grandmother's grip and walked directly toward the injured animal. Rose gasped and reached out to stop her, but Mia was already kneeling beside the German shepherd. "Mia, no! Come back here right now!" Rose called, but her granddaughter wasn't listening. The dog looked up as Mia approached, and for a moment, their eyes met. What passed between them in that instant was something beyond words, beyond understanding. The German shepherd's tail gave the smallest wag, and he lowered his massive head until it was level with Mia's small face. "Hi there," Mia whispered, her voice so soft it was almost lost in the rain. "Are you hurt?" The dog whimpered, not in pain, but in what sounded remarkably like relief, as if he had been waiting his entire life for someone to ask that simple question, with genuine care. Rose hurried over to retrieve her granddaughter, but stopped short when she saw what was happening. The large, intimidating German shepherd was gently nuzzling Mia's outstretched hand, and Mia was speaking to him in hushed tones as if they were old friends sharing secrets. "It's okay," Mia was saying. "I know you're scared, but you don't have to be scared anymore." Other passersby had begun to notice the unusual scene. A few people stopped to watch, and someone pulled out their phone to record the tender moment between the small child and the large dog. There was something magical happening, something that made even the most hurried strangers pause in their tracks. Mr. Peterson emerged from his store again, probably to make sure the dog had moved along, but he too fell silent when he saw Mia. The little girl had somehow managed to calm the animal completely. The German Shepherd sat perfectly still, allowing her to examine his injured paw with the gentle care of a trained veterinarian. "Grandma," Mia called without looking up. "He needs help. His foot is cut, and he's really, really sad." Rose approached cautiously. She had raised 4 children and helped raise 6 grandchildren, but she had never seen anything quite like this. The dog that had appeared so menacing just moments before now seemed as gentle as a lamb, completely focused on the little girl beside him. "Mia, we need to be very careful," Rose said softly. "We don't know anything about this dog." "His name is Bear," Mia announced suddenly, as if this information had been whispered directly into her ear. "And he's been looking for someone to help him for a very long time." Rose blinked in surprise. "How do you know his name, sweetheart?" Mia finally looked up at her grandmother, and Rose was struck by the unusual intensity in the child's dark eyes. "He told me," she said simply, as if this explanation made perfect sense. The crowd that had gathered murmured among themselves. A few people were now openly recording the scene with their phones, captivated by the inexplicable connection between the little girl and the stray dog. "That's impossible, Mia," Rose said gently. "Dogs can't talk." "Not with words," Mia replied, turning her attention back to Bear. "But he talks to me anyway. He's been through something really scary, Grandma. Something bad happened to him, and he needs our help." Bear seemed to understand every word. He moved closer to Mia, careful not to put weight on his injured paw, and rested his large head against her small shoulder. The gesture was so human, so full of gratitude and trust, that several people in the crowd audibly gasped. Rose felt her resolve weakening. She had always prided herself on being practical, on making sensible decisions. But looking at her granddaughter and this mysterious dog, she found herself considering something that went against every logical thought in her head. "Mia, we can't take him home," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Your parents would never allow it, and we don't have room for a big dog." "But we can't leave him here," Mia replied, her eyes filling with tears. "Look at him, Grandma. Really look at him." Rose did look, and what she saw broke her heart. Bear's eyes held an intelligence and sadness that seemed almost human. His coat, beneath the mud and rain, showed signs of good care, suggesting he had once belonged to someone who loved him. But there were also signs of recent trauma, scars and scrapes that spoke of hardship and abandonment. "Please, Grandma," Mia whispered, "just for tonight, until we can find someone to help him properly." The crowd had grown larger now, and Rose could hear whispered conversations around them. Someone mentioned calling animal control, while another person suggested contacting a local rescue organization. But through it all, Mia remained focused solely on Bear, her small hands gently stroking his wet fur. "The poor thing's shivering," said an elderly woman from the crowd. "And that little girl has such a way with him. I've never seen anything like it." A young man with his phone still recording spoke up. "This is incredible. It's like they've known each other their whole lives." Rose looked around at the faces surrounding them. Most showed genuine concern and amazement. Even Mr. Peterson, who had been so harsh with Bear just minutes earlier, now watched with a softer expression. "All right," Rose said finally, surprising herself with the decision. "Just for tonight. But we'll have to figure out something permanent tomorrow." Mia's face lit up with joy, so pure and radiant that several people in the crowd smiled despite themselves. "Thank you, Grandma. Thank you so much." Bear seemed to understand what had just happened. His tail wagged more enthusiastically, and he carefully stood up, keeping his weight off his injured paw. When Mia stood as well, he moved to walk beside her, matching his pace to her much smaller steps. "Well, I'll be," said the elderly woman who had spoken earlier. "It's like he knows he's been rescued." As Rose, Mia, and Bear began walking toward home, the crowd slowly dispersed, but many people continued recording and taking pictures. The young man who had been filming approached Rose before she got too far away. "Ma'am, I hope you don't mind, but I got that whole thing on video. It's absolutely remarkable what just happened here. Would it be okay if I shared this online? I think people would really love to see something this beautiful." Rose hesitated. She wasn't entirely comfortable with the idea of her granddaughter becoming internet famous, but there had been something undeniably special about what they had all witnessed. "I suppose that would be all right," she said finally. "Just make sure you don't include any personal information about us." "Of course not," the young man assured her. "I just think the world needs to see that there's still kindness and love out there, especially from someone so young." As they walked home through the rain, Bear stayed close to Mia's side. Every few steps he would look up at her, as if to make sure she was still there, that this wasn't just a dream he would wake up from. Mia, for her part, chattered constantly to her new friend, telling him about her family, her school, and all the things they would do together. "You're going to love my room," she was saying, as they turned onto Rose's street. "I have a really soft rug where you can sleep, and lots of books with pictures of dogs in them. Oh, and I have a stuffed animal that looks just like you. His name is Buddy, but maybe we should change it since your name is Bear." Rose listened to her granddaughter's one-sided conversation with growing amazement. Mia had always been a quiet, somewhat shy child, but with Bear beside her, she seemed transformed, more confident and animated than Rose had ever seen her. "Mia," Rose said as they approached the small house where she lived alone since her husband's death 2 years earlier, "we need to think about how we're going to explain this to your parents when they come to pick you up. They'll understand once they meet Bear," Mia said with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "He's special, Grandma. Really, really special." As they reached the front porch, Bear hesitated for the first time since leaving the store. He looked up at the modest blue house with its white shutters and flower boxes, then back at Mia, as if seeking permission to enter this safe haven. "It's okay," Mia assured him, taking hold of his collar gently. "This is Grandma's house, and now it's your house too, at least for tonight." Rose unlocked the front door and held it open. Bear looked at her questioningly, and she found herself nodding in encouragement. "Come on then," she said softly. "Let's get you dried off and see about that paw." Inside the warm, cozy house, Bear stood very still while Rose brought towels from the linen closet. Mia helped dry his fur, talking to him constantly in her gentle, reassuring voice. The dog submitted to their care with remarkable patience, never once showing any sign of aggression or fear. "He's been hurt more than just his paw," Mia observed as they worked. "Look, Grandma, he has scars on his side." Rose looked more closely and saw that Mia was right. There were several healed cuts along Bear's ribs, and what looked like an old burn mark on his left shoulder. These weren't injuries from living on the streets. They were older, more deliberate. "Someone hurt him on purpose," Rose murmured, her anger rising at the thought of anyone harming such a gentle creature. "That's why he needed us to find him," Mia said matter-of-factly. "He's been waiting for people who would be kind to him." As the afternoon wore on, Bear gradually relaxed in his new environment. Rose found an old blanket and made a comfortable bed for him in the living room, while Mia shared her afternoon snack of apple slices and crackers. Bear ate carefully, as if he couldn't quite believe the food was really meant for him. "We should probably take him to see Dr. Martinez about that paw," Rose said, referring to the local veterinarian who had cared for her family's pets for decades. "Tomorrow," Mia agreed. "Tonight he just needs to rest and feel safe." As evening approached, Rose began to worry about how she would explain the situation to Mia's parents. David and Linda Chen were reasonable people, but they lived in a small apartment that didn't allow pets, and they certainly hadn't planned on their daughter bringing home a large, stray dog. The sound of a car in the driveway announced their arrival. Rose took a deep breath and prepared for what was sure to be a difficult conversation. "Remember," she whispered to Mia, "we need to explain this very carefully to your mom and dad." But when David and Linda entered the house and saw their daughter curled up on the living room floor next to a massive German Shepherd, their reactions were not what Rose had expected. "Oh my goodness," Linda gasped, but she didn't sound angry or frightened. She sounded amazed. "Mia, who is this?" "This is Bear," Mia announced proudly. "I found him today, and he needed help, so Grandma said he could stay for tonight." David approached slowly, his eyes taking in the peaceful scene before him. Bear looked up at the newcomers but didn't move from his position next to Mia. His tail wagged once, a cautious greeting. "He's hurt," Mia continued, pointing to Bear's bandaged paw. "Someone was mean to him, but we're going to take care of him now." Linda and David exchanged a look that Rose couldn't quite interpret. There was concern there, certainly, but also something else, something that looked almost like recognition. "Mom," David said to Rose, "tell us exactly what happened today. As Rose recounted the events outside Peterson's store, describing Mia's immediate connection with the dog and her insistence on helping him, she watched her son and daughter-in-law's expressions carefully. They listened without interruption, occasionally glancing at Mia and Bear, who remained contentedly together on the makeshift bed. The strangest part, Rose concluded, is how they seem to understand each other. I know it sounds crazy, but it's almost like they're communicating somehow. It doesn't sound crazy at all, Linda said quietly. Mia has always had a special way with animals. Remember when she was 3 and calmed down Mrs. Wilson's aggressive cat just by sitting near it? And last year at the zoo, David added, when that injured bird landed right next to her, and she somehow got it to stay still while the zookeeper examined it. Rose looked at her granddaughter with new eyes. She had always known Mia was special, but she was beginning to realize that special might be an understatement. So, what do we do now? Rose asked. We can't keep him permanently. I'm too old to care for a dog this size, and your apartment doesn't allow pets. We'll figure something out, David said, though he sounded uncertain. Maybe we can find a good rescue organization or a family who would adopt him. Bear whimpered softly, as if he understood exactly what they were discussing. Mia immediately turned her attention to him, stroking his head and whispering reassurances. Don't worry, she told him. Nobody's going to hurt you anymore, I promise. The conviction in her young voice was so strong, so absolute, that the adults in the room fell silent. In that moment, they all understood that whatever happened next, Mia would not abandon Bear easily. The bond between them had been forged in a single afternoon, but it already seemed unbreakable. As the family prepared to leave Bear with Rose for the night, promising to return first thing in the morning to discuss long-term solutions, none of them could have predicted what was about to unfold. The video from that afternoon was already spreading across social media platforms, shared by hundreds and soon to be thousands of people who were touched by the simple act of kindness they had witnessed. But Bear's story was far more complex than any of them realized. The scars on his body told a tale of survival and escape that would soon come to light, revealing secrets that would change their lives forever. For now, though, he was safe, warm, and loved, curled up next to a little girl who had seen past his rough exterior to the gentle soul within. The rain continued to fall outside Rose's house that night, but inside, something extraordinary was taking root. A connection that would test the limits of what people believed about the bond between humans and animals, and ultimately prove that sometimes the most unlikely friendships are the ones that matter most. The next morning arrived with unexpected sunshine, as if the storm had washed away all the darkness from the previous day. Rose woke early, as was her habit, and padded quietly to the living room to check on Bear. What she found there made her pause in the doorway, her heart swelling with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Bear was awake, sitting perfectly still beside the couch where he had slept, but his attention wasn't focused on the morning light streaming through the windows or the sounds of the neighborhood waking up. Instead, he was staring intently at the front door, his ears perked forward and his tail wagging slowly, as if he knew something wonderful was about to happen. Rose glanced at the clock on the mantel. It was barely 7 in the morning, far too early for David and Linda to arrive with Mia. Yet Bear seemed convinced that someone special was coming. His behavior reminded Rose of her late husband's old dog, who had always known when family members were approaching long before anyone else could hear or see them.
"What is it, boy?" Rose whispered, moving closer to Bear. "Do you hear something?"
Bear looked at her briefly, his dark eyes bright with anticipation, then returned his gaze to the door. His tail wagged faster now, and he began to make soft, whimpering sounds, not of distress, but of excitement. 10 minutes later, Rose heard the unmistakable sound of a car door slamming in her driveway. Bear's entire body seemed to vibrate with joy, though he remained seated as if he had been trained to wait for permission before moving. Rose looked out the window and was surprised to see David's car parked outside. "Well, I'll be," she murmured to herself. "How did you know they were coming, Bear?" The front door opened, and Mia burst in like a small tornado of energy and excitement. She had clearly convinced her parents to bring her over much earlier than planned, probably by refusing to eat breakfast or getting dressed until they agreed. "Bear!" she called out, and the German Shepherd finally broke his patient vigil. He bounded toward her with a grace that seemed impossible for such a large dog, careful to keep his weight off his injured paw but moving with obvious joy. The reunion between the little girl and the dog was something to behold. Bear lowered himself to Mia's level, allowing her to wrap her small arms around his thick neck while he gently nuzzled her face. They stayed like that for several long moments, and Rose could have sworn she heard Mia whispering something too soft for adult ears to catch. "I told you we had to come early," Mia said to her parents as they entered behind her. "Bear was waiting for me. He knew I was coming." David and Linda exchanged another one of those meaningful looks that had become more frequent since yesterday's events. They had spent most of the previous evening researching German shepherds, local animal shelters, and something else they hadn't shared with Rose yet. "Mia," Linda said gently, "we need to talk about Bear's future. We can't keep imposing on Grandma Rose, and we found some good rescue organizations that might be able to help find him a permanent home." Bear's ears flattened slightly, and he moved closer to Mia, as if he understood exactly what was being discussed. Mia's face fell, and she tightened her grip on Bear's fur. "But he belongs with us," she said, her voice small but determined. "He told me so." "Sweetheart," David began, kneeling down to his daughter's level, "dogs don't actually talk to people. I know it feels like Bear understands you, but—" "He does understand me," Mia interrupted, something unusual for her typically polite demeanor. "And I understand him. He's trying to tell us something important, but nobody wants to listen." Rose watched this exchange with growing concern. She had raised 4 children and knew the difference between typical childhood imagination and something deeper. Mia's connection with Bear felt different, more profound than simple wishful thinking. "What kind of important thing?" Rose asked, ignoring the warning look David shot her way. Mia looked around at the adults, as if trying to decide whether they could be trusted with sensitive information. Finally, she seemed to make up her mind. "He's not just lost," she said quietly. "He ran away from somewhere bad, really bad, and there's a little girl who's in trouble, and Bear knows where she is." The silence that followed Mia's words was heavy and uncomfortable. The adults exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to respond to such a serious claim from a 5-year-old. "Mia," Linda said carefully, "that's a very big thing to say. Are you sure you're not just making up a story?" "I'm not making it up," Mia's voice rose with frustration. "Bear showed me, in my dreams last night, there's a girl with yellow hair, and she's scared, and she's somewhere dark and cold." Bear whimpered and pressed closer to Mia, as if offering comfort for the distressing images she was describing. His behavior was so human-like, so responsive to her emotional state, that even the skeptical adults couldn't ignore it. "What else did you see in this dream?" Rose asked, much to David and Linda's apparent dismay. Mia closed her eyes, as if trying to recall details that were already fading. There was a red truck with a dent in the front, and a man with a scar on his hand, and a place with lots of trees and a broken fence. She opened her eyes and looked directly at Bear. "That's where you came from, isn't it? That's where the bad man was?" Bear's response was immediate and unmistakable. He began to pace in a small circle, agitated and restless. His breathing became heavier, and he kept looking toward the door as if he wanted to run but didn't know which direction to go. "Okay, this is getting too intense," David said, standing up and reaching for Mia. "We need to focus on reality here. Bear is just a stray dog who needs a home, and Mia is a little girl with a big imagination." But as David spoke, Bear suddenly froze. His head turned toward the window, and every muscle in his body tensed. A low growl rumbled in his chest, so deep and threatening that all 4 humans took an involuntary step backward. "What's wrong with him?" Linda whispered, fear creeping into her voice. Rose moved to the window and looked out. A red pickup truck was driving slowly down her quiet street, the driver seeming to peer at each house as he passed. The truck was old and battered, with a noticeable dent in the front bumper. "Oh my God," Rose breathed, her face going pale. "What is it?" David asked, moving to join his mother at the window. "The truck," Rose said quietly. "It's red, and it has a dent in the front, just like Mia described." Bear's growling intensified, and he moved protectively in front of Mia, his body language shifting from gentle companion to fierce guardian in an instant. This was clearly an animal who had been trained for protection, despite his recent rough treatment. The truck slowed even more as it approached Rose's house, and through the windshield, they could see a man in a baseball cap studying the property. He seemed to be looking for something, or someone. "Everyone stay calm," David said, though his own voice was tight with tension. "It's probably just coincidence." But Bear didn't think it was coincidence. He began to pace between the window and the front door, his agitation growing by the second. When the truck finally passed by without stopping, he didn't relax. Instead, he went to Mia and began nudging her toward the back of the house with his nose. "He wants us to hide," Mia said, understanding Bear's message immediately. "The man in the truck is looking for him." "That's ridiculous," Linda said, but her voice lacked conviction. "How could some random person know Bear is here?" "Maybe he's not random," Rose said quietly. "Maybe he's exactly who Bear has been running from." The implications of Rose's words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. If Mia's dreams were somehow based in reality, if Bear really had witnessed something terrible, then his presence in their lives might have put them all in danger. "We should call the police," David said, reaching for his phone. "And tell them what?" Linda asked. "That our 5-year-old had a dream about a truck, and then a truck drove down the street?" Before anyone could answer, Bear made the decision for them. He walked calmly to the back door and began scratching at it with his good paw, looking back at them expectantly. "He wants to show us something," Mia said, moving toward the door. "We should follow him." "Absolutely not," David said firmly. "We're not following a stray dog into the woods based on a child's dream." But Rose was already reaching for the door handle. Something about Bear's behavior, combined with Mia's unusual certainty, had convinced her that this was more than childhood imagination. "What if she's right?" Rose asked. "What if there really is someone in trouble, and Bear is the only one who knows where to find them?" "Mom, this is crazy," David protested. "We're talking about a dog who was kicked out of a grocery store yesterday. He's probably just confused and traumatized." Bear seemed to understand that he was losing the argument. He walked back to Mia and sat directly in front of her, staring into her eyes with an intensity that made the adults uncomfortable. For nearly a full minute, girl and dog remained locked in this silent communication. Finally, Mia nodded, as if she had received clear instructions. "He says we don't have to follow him far, just to the edge of the woods behind Grandma's house. There's something there he wants us to see." "Mia, this has gone far enough," Linda said, her patience finally wearing thin. "Dogs don't give instructions, and we're not going on some wild adventure because you think you can talk to animals." But even as Linda spoke, she couldn't ignore the way Bear had known they were coming that morning, or his reaction to the red truck, or the uncanny accuracy of the details Mia had described before seeing them in real life. Rose made the decision that would change everything. "I'm going to follow him," she announced, "just to the tree line. If there's nothing there, we'll know this is all imagination. But if there is something..." "Then we call the police immediately," David finished, realizing he wasn't going to be able to stop his mother or his daughter from pursuing this strange mystery. "I'm coming too," Mia said, as if there had never been any question about it. "We're all going," Linda sighed, grabbing her jacket from the chair, "but we stay together, and at the first sign of anything dangerous, we come straight back." Bear seemed to understand that he had won. His tail wagged once, and he moved to the back door to wait patiently, while the humans prepared themselves for what might be the most important walk of their lives. Rose's backyard stretched for about 50 feet, before giving way to a dense line of oak and pine trees. It was a boundary she had always respected, never venturing into the woods that belonged to the state park beyond. But now, following a mysterious German shepherd who had appeared in their lives less than 24 hours ago, she found herself stepping over fallen logs and pushing through underbrush she had never explored. Bear moved with purpose despite his injured paw, pausing frequently to make sure his human companions were keeping up. He seemed to know exactly where he was going, following a path that was invisible to human eyes but apparently clear to him. "How much farther?" David asked after they had been walking for about 10 minutes. "We're getting pretty deep into the woods." Bear answered by stopping completely and looking back at them with an expression that seemed to say, "We're here." At first, none of them could see anything unusual. They were in a small clearing surrounded by tall trees, with nothing visible except fallen leaves and a few scattered rocks. But Bear walked directly to what looked like a random pile of brush and began pawing at it carefully. "What are you doing, boy?" Rose asked, moving closer. Bear looked at her, then at the brush pile, then back at her. His message was clear: look closer. David approached cautiously and began moving some of the larger branches aside. What he found underneath made his blood run cold. "Oh God," he whispered. "Linda, take Mia back to the house, now." "What is it?" Linda asked, but she was already reaching for her daughter. "Daddy, what's wrong?" Mia asked, picking up on the fear in her father's voice. David had uncovered what was clearly a makeshift campsite, but not the kind used by ordinary hikers. There were empty food cans, a dirty sleeping bag, and most disturbing of all, several items that clearly belonged to a young girl: a pink hair clip, a small sneaker, and a child's drawing that had been carefully preserved in a plastic bag. "We're calling the police right now," David said, his voice shaking as he pulled out his phone, "and we're getting out of here immediately." But as the family prepared to leave the clearing, Bear did something that stopped them all in their tracks. He walked to the base of a large oak tree and began digging frantically in the soft earth with his good paw, whimpering with urgency. "He's found something else," Mia said, pulling away from her mother to get closer to Bear. "Mia, stay back," Linda warned, but her daughter was already kneeling beside the German Shepherd. What Bear uncovered this time was even more chilling than the campsite. Buried in a shallow hole was a small backpack with a name tag that read Emma Peterson in childish handwriting. Rose gasped. "Peterson, like the store owner who kicked Bear out yesterday?" The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together in the most horrible way possible. Bear hadn't been a random stray looking for food and shelter. He had been trying to lead someone back to this place, back to evidence of a crime that only he had witnessed. "We need to get out of here now," David said, his training as a police dispatcher kicking in. "This is a crime scene, and we've already contaminated it by being here." But as they turned to leave, the sound of breaking branches made them all freeze. Someone else was in the woods, and they were moving toward the clearing. Bear's reaction was immediate and terrifying. He placed himself between the approaching footsteps and Mia, his hackles raised and his teeth bared in a silent snarl. This was not the gentle, loving animal they had come to know. This was a trained protection dog who recognized a mortal threat. "Hide," David whispered urgently, pushing his family behind the large oak tree. "And whatever happens, don't make a sound." Through the trees, they could see a figure approaching the clearing. It was a man in work clothes and a baseball cap, the same man they had seen driving the red truck past Rose's house that morning. He was carrying something in his hands, but they couldn't make out what it was from their hiding spot. The man entered the clearing and immediately noticed that the brush pile had been disturbed. He cursed under his breath and began looking around frantically, as if searching for signs of who might have been there. Bear remained perfectly still, but every muscle in his body was coiled and ready to spring. His eyes never left the intruder, and his silent intensity was more frightening than any amount of barking would have been. The man was getting closer to their hiding spot, his movements becoming more agitated as he realized that his carefully concealed campsite had been discovered. In his hand, they could now see, was a length of rope and what looked like a knife. Just as the man was about to round the tree where they were hiding, Bear made his move. He launched himself from his concealed position with a speed and ferocity that none of them had imagined possible, his injured paw forgotten in the face of the need to protect his new family. The man screamed as Bear knocked him to the ground, the knife flying from his grasp to land several feet away. The German Shepherd pinned him down with his powerful front paws, his teeth inches from the man's throat, waiting for any excuse to finish what he had started. "Call 911, David shouted to Linda as he emerged from their hiding place. "Tell them we've found the Peterson kidnapping suspect and we need police and paramedics immediately." The man on the ground was babbling incoherently, trying to explain himself even as Bear's weight made it difficult for him to breathe. But his words only confirmed what they all now understood. Bear had been the sole witness to Emma Peterson's abduction, and he had been trying to lead someone back to find her ever since. As sirens began to wail in the distance, growing closer by the moment, Rose looked at her granddaughter and the remarkable dog who had brought them all to this moment. Mia was standing calmly beside Bear, her small hand resting on his back as if to remind him that his job was done, that help was finally coming. "You did it," she whispered to Bear. "You found someone who would listen." Bear's tail wagged once, but he didn't take his eyes off the man beneath him until the first police officer entered the clearing. Only then did he step back, returning to Mia's side as if the terrifying guardian dog had been replaced once again by the gentle companion they had grown to love. The rescue of Emma Peterson would make headlines across the country, but for the small family who had taken in a stray German Shepherd, the real story was just beginning. Bear's past was more complex than any of them had imagined, and his future with them was far from certain. But one thing had become absolutely clear. The bond between Mia and Bear was not just special, it was extraordinary, and it had already saved at least one life. The police station buzzed with activity as Detective Sarah Walsh reviewed the evidence that had been collected from the campsite. Emma Peterson had been found safe, though traumatized, in an abandoned cabin 3 miles deeper into the woods. The man they had captured, Frank Morrison, was a drifter with a history of violence who had been watching the Peterson family for weeks before taking their 7-year-old daughter. But what puzzled Detective Walsh wasn't the criminal himself. Men like Morrison were unfortunately common enough. What puzzled her was how a 5-year-old girl and a stray dog had managed to solve a case that had stumped the police department for over a week. "So, let me get this straight," she said to David Chen, who sat across from her desk with his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. "Your daughter claims the dog told her where to find the missing girl in a dream?" David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Even after everything they had witnessed, the story sounded incredible when spoken aloud. "I know how it sounds, Detective, but Mia described details she couldn't possibly have known. The red truck, the dent in the bumper, even the scar on Morrison's hand. She told us about all of that before we ever saw any of it." Detective Walsh leaned back in her chair and studied the file in front of her. "According to our records, the dog, Bear, doesn't exist in any official capacity. No microchip, no registration, no vaccination records. It's like he appeared out of nowhere." "Maybe he did," David said quietly. "Maybe he appeared exactly when Emma needed him most." Before Detective Walsh could respond, her partner, Officer Martinez, knocked on the doorframe. "Sarah, you need to see this. We just got the results back from the animal control check." Detective Walsh waved him in, and Officer Martinez placed a thick folder on her desk. "Bear isn't just any stray dog. According to the vet who examined him, he's been professionally trained, police or military-grade training. His scars suggest he's been through combat or some kind of specialized work." "Combat?" David asked, his concern for Bear's well-being growing. "What kind of combat?" "The kind that leaves psychological scars as well as physical ones," Officer Martinez explained. "Dr. Rodriguez thinks Bear might be suffering from a form of PTSD. It would explain his hypervigilance and his protective instincts around your daughter." Detective Walsh opened the folder and examined the veterinary report. "This says he's approximately 4 years old, in excellent health despite recent trauma, and shows signs of advanced obedience training. There's also evidence of surgical scars that suggest professional medical care at some point." "So, he belonged to someone," David said, "someone who cared enough to get him proper medical treatment." "That's what we need to figure out," Detective Walsh replied, "because until we do, Bear's legal status is unclear. Animal Control wants to place him in a shelter pending investigation, but given his role in Emma's rescue—" "You can't take him away from Mia," David interrupted, surprising himself with the intensity of his reaction. "I know this sounds crazy, but they need each other, and after what Bear did for Emma, doesn't he deserve better than a shelter?" Officer Martinez nodded in agreement. "The whole department feels the same way. Bear's a hero, but the law is the law, and we can't just ignore proper procedures because we like the outcome." What none of them knew was that while they discussed Bear's fate in the police station, Mia and her 4-legged friend were experiencing something that would change the entire trajectory of the investigation. Back at Rose's house, Mia sat on the living room floor with Bear's head in her lap, both of them exhausted from the morning's events. Rose had tried to get Mia to take a nap, but the little girl insisted on staying close to Bear, as if she sensed that forces beyond their control were working to separate them. "Are you scared?" Mia whispered to Bear, running her fingers through his thick fur. "About what's going to happen to us?" Bear's response wasn't verbal, but Mia felt it nonetheless, a wave of sadness mixed with determination. He was scared, but not for himself. He was worried about her, about what would happen when the authorities decided his fate. "I won't let them take you away," Mia promised. "We're a team now. Teams stick together." As if responding to her words, Bear lifted his head and looked directly into her eyes. What happened next would have seemed impossible to anyone watching, but to Mia, it felt as natural as breathing. Images began flowing through her mind. Not dreams this time, but memories. Bear's memories. She saw flashes of a military base, men in uniform, training exercises that pushed both human and canine participants to their limits. She saw Bear as a younger dog, proud and eager, working alongside a handler who treated him with respect and affection. Then the images grew darker, an explosion, smoke and fire, Bear running through chaos, searching desperately for his handler. The terrible moment when he found the man who had been his partner, his friend, his whole world, lying motionless in the dirt. Mia gasped and pulled her hands away from Bear's head, the intensity of his grief overwhelming her small frame. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she understood, for the first time, the depth of loss that Bear carried with him every day. "Your person died," she whispered, her voice breaking, "in the war, and you've been looking for a new person to protect ever since." Bear whimpered softly and nuzzled closer to Mia, seeking comfort from the only human who had ever truly understood his pain. In that moment, their bond deepened beyond mere friendship or even love. They became two souls united by loss and healing, each giving the other what they needed most. Rose watched from the kitchen doorway, tears streaming down her own face. She couldn't hear the conversation between Mia and Bear, but she could feel the emotion radiating from both of them. Whatever was happening, it was profound and real, and it was breaking her heart to think that bureaucracy might tear them apart. The sound of cars pulling into her driveway interrupted the tender moment. Rose looked out the window and saw not just David and Linda returning, but also two official vehicles, one from animal control and one marked with police insignia. "Mia," Rose called gently, "your parents are back, and they've brought some people who want to meet Bear." Mia's face went pale, and Bear immediately sensed her distress. He positioned himself between her and the front door, his protective instincts kicking in despite the fact that these were supposedly friendly visitors. "It's okay," Mia whispered to Bear, though her voice shook with uncertainty. "We'll face this together." David and Linda entered first, followed by Detective Walsh, Officer Martinez, and a woman in a tan uniform who introduced herself as Carol Stevens from Animal Control. The official nature of their visit was immediately apparent, and the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Hello, Mia," Detective Walsh said, kneeling down to the little girl's level. "I wanted to thank you personally for helping us find Emma. You and Bear are both heroes." Mia nodded politely, but didn't release her grip on Bear's collar. "Are you here to take him away?" The directness of the question caught the adults off guard. Detective Walsh glanced at Carol Stevens before answering. "We're here to figure out what's best for everyone involved. Bear is a special dog, and we want to make sure he ends up in the right place." "He's already in the right place," Mia said with quiet certainty. "He belongs with me." Carol Stevens stepped forward, her expression sympathetic but professional. "Mia, Bear is a very large, very powerful dog who's been through some difficult experiences. He needs special care from people who understand dogs like him." "I understand him," Mia replied simply. "Better than anyone." As if to prove her point, Bear relaxed his protective stance and lay down beside Mia, resting his head on her lap. The change in his demeanor was immediate and obvious, from tense guard dog to gentle companion in the space of a heartbeat. "That's remarkable," Officer Martinez murmured. "I've never seen him that calm around strangers." Detective Walsh was studying the interaction between Mia and Bear with growing fascination. "Carol, could we hold off on any decisions for a few more days? I'd like to do some additional research into Bear's background. I suppose we could classify him as evidence in an ongoing investigation," Carol Stevens said reluctantly, "but someone would need to take responsibility for his care during that time." "We will," Rose said immediately, speaking for the first time since the officials had arrived. "Bear can stay here for as long as necessary." "With respect, Mrs. Chen," Carol Stevens replied, "caring for a dog with Bear's background requires specific expertise. He's not a pet. He's a highly trained working animal who's experienced significant trauma." "Then maybe he needs love more than expertise," Mia said, her young voice carrying a wisdom that made the adults uncomfortable. "Maybe he needs someone who won't try to fix him, but just wants to be his friend." Bear seemed to agree with this assessment. He moved closer to Mia and placed his large paw gently on her small leg, a gesture so tender and deliberate that even Carol Stevens seemed moved by it. "There's something else," Detective Walsh said, pulling out her phone. "The video of Mia and Bear's first meeting has gone viral. We're getting calls from news stations, animal welfare organizations, and even some military contacts who think they might know Bear's identity." She showed them her phone screen, where the view count on the video had climbed to over 2 million in just 24 hours. The comments were overwhelmingly positive, with people from around the world praising Mia's compassion and Bear's obvious intelligence. "One of the calls came from a Colonel James Harrison at Fort Campbell," Detective Walsh continued. "He thinks Bear might be a military working dog who went missing in action over a year ago. If that's true, Bear isn't a stray at all. He's a veteran." The implications of this revelation hung heavy in the air. If Bear was indeed a military working dog, his status would be entirely different from that of an ordinary stray. He would have rights, benefits, and most importantly, people who were legally responsible for his welfare. "What does that mean for Bear?" David asked. "And for Mia?" "It means we need to verify his identity first," Detective Walsh replied. "Colonel Harrison is driving down tomorrow with Bear's service records and his former handler's effects. If it's a match, we'll have a much clearer picture of what Bear's been through and what he needs going forward." Mia looked up at the adults with tears in her eyes. "But what if the military people want to take him back? What if they don't understand that he's home now?" It was a question none of them could answer. Military working dogs were considered valuable assets, and the protocols for their retirement and placement were complex and often inflexible. Even if Bear had been declared missing in action, his return to service would depend on his physical and psychological fitness evaluations. "Let's take this one step at a time," Linda said, sitting down beside her daughter and Bear. "Tomorrow we'll learn more about Bear's past. Tonight, let's just focus on the fact that everyone is safe and together." But as the officials prepared to leave, promising to return the next day with Colonel Harrison, none of them noticed the subtle change in Bear's behavior. His ears were perked toward the window, and his body had tensed in the way they had learned to recognize as a warning sign. "What is it, boy?" Rose asked, following his gaze toward the street. Outside, a black sedan with government plates was parked across from the house. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see who was inside, but the vehicle's presence felt ominous and official. "That wasn't there when we arrived," Officer Martinez observed, his hand instinctively moving toward his radio. Detective Walsh was already calling for backup when the sedan's doors opened and two people in military uniforms stepped out. They surveyed the house with professional efficiency before walking purposefully toward the front door. "Looks like Colonel Harrison decided not to wait until tomorrow," Detective Walsh muttered. But as the military personnel approached, Bear's reaction was not what anyone expected. Instead of the protective aggression he had shown toward Morrison or the cautious acceptance he had displayed with the police, Bear began to shake. His entire body trembled with what could only be described as terror, and he pressed himself against Mia as if trying to disappear. "It's okay," Mia whispered, wrapping her arms around Bear's neck. "I'm here. You're safe." But Bear didn't feel safe. The memories that Mia had glimpsed earlier came flooding back, not just of his handler's death, but of what had happened afterward. The confusion, the blame, the people in uniforms who had declared him unfit for service and scheduled him for termination. He had escaped before they could carry out their decision, but the fear of being recaptured had driven him to live as a stray for over a year. The knock on the door was sharp and authoritative. Detective Walsh answered it, revealing a stern-faced colonel and a younger sergeant, both carrying official-looking folders. "Colonel Harrison," Detective Walsh said, extending her hand, "we weren't expecting you until tomorrow." "Plans changed," Colonel Harrison replied curtly, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Bear. "We've been tracking that animal for 14 months. He's stolen military property, and we're here to reclaim him." The word property hit Mia like a physical blow. She tightened her grip on Bear and looked up at the colonel with blazing eyes. "He's not property. He's a hero. He saved Emma, and he saved all of us." Colonel Harrison's expression softened slightly when he looked at the small girl, but his voice remained official. "Miss, I understand you've become attached to the animal, but MWD Ranger is government property with a value exceeding $50,000. He was declared AWOL after abandoning his post during a combat operation." "His name is Bear," Mia said firmly, "and he didn't abandon anything. His person died, and he was scared and sad, and nobody helped him." "That's not how military protocols work," the sergeant said, stepping forward with a leash and collar designed for large dogs. "MWD Ranger needs to return to base for evaluation and reassignment." But as the sergeant approached, Bear did something that surprised everyone in the room. Instead of cowering or becoming aggressive, he stood up and moved to stand beside Mia, placing himself between her and the military personnel. His posture was alert but not threatening, the stance of a protector, not a fighter. "He's protecting her," Officer Martinez observed quietly. "Look at his body language. He's not showing fear or aggression. He's showing loyalty." Colonel Harrison studied Bear more carefully, and for the first time since entering the house, his military bearings seemed to crack slightly. That's not the same dog we lost. Ranger was damaged goods after the IED explosion. Nervous, unpredictable, unsuitable for further service. Maybe he just needed time to heal, Rose said, speaking up for her granddaughter and the dog who had become part of their family. Maybe he needed to find his purpose again. A military working dog's purpose is to serve, Colonel Harrison replied, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. He is serving, Mia said, looking directly at the colonel with the fearless honesty that only children possess. He's serving me and Emma and everyone who needs protecting. Isn't that what soldiers are supposed to do? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and for a long moment, nobody spoke. Finally, Detective Walsh broke the silence. Colonel, given Bear's role in solving a kidnapping case and his obvious bond with this family, perhaps we could discuss alternative arrangements. Surely the military has provisions for working dogs who've earned retirement. There are provisions, Colonel Harrison admitted reluctantly, but they typically require extensive evaluation and paperwork. The process can take months. Then we'll wait months, David said, speaking for his family with a certainty that surprised even him. Bear isn't going anywhere today. The standoff continued for several more tense minutes, with neither side willing to back down. But as they argued over Bear's fate, none of them noticed that the dog himself had made his own decision. He walked calmly to where Colonel Harrison stood and sat down directly in front of him, meeting the officer's eyes with steady, unflinching gaze. It was a moment of recognition that transcended words or regulations. Colonel Harrison saw in Bear's eyes not the broken, traumatized animal that had disappeared from the base 14 months ago, but a mature, purposeful working dog who had found his mission again. 2 weeks, Colonel Harrison said finally. I'll give you 2 weeks to file the necessary paperwork for civilian adoption. If everything checks out, and if the psychological evaluation shows he's stable in this environment, we'll consider early retirement. Mia's face lit up with joy, but Bear remained calm and composed, as if he had known all along that this would be the outcome. He returned to Mia's side and settled down beside her, his mission accomplished through quiet dignity rather than conflict. As the military personnel prepared to leave, Colonel Harrison paused at the door. For what it's worth, he said to Mia, Ranger, Bear, was one of the best dogs I ever worked with. His handler, Sergeant Matthews, would have been proud to see what he's become. After everyone had left and the house had returned to its normal quiet, Mia and Bear sat together on the living room floor, both of them emotionally exhausted but victorious. They had faced their biggest challenge yet and emerged stronger for it. We did it, Mia whispered to Bear. We get to stay together. Bear's response was a gentle nuzzle and a contented sigh. For the first time since his handler's death, he felt truly at peace. He had found his new mission, his new purpose, and his new family. The healing could finally begin. The 2 weeks that followed passed in a blur of paperwork, interviews, and psychological evaluations. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the veterinarian who had first examined Bear, worked closely with military psychologists to assess his mental state and suitability for civilian life. What they discovered challenged everything the military thought that they knew about traumatized working dogs. His stress markers have decreased significantly since being placed with the Chen family, Dr. Rodriguez explained to Colonel Harrison during one of their many phone conferences. His sleep patterns have improved, his appetite is healthy, and most remarkably, he's showing none of the hypervigilance or aggression we typically see in dogs with combat PTSD. Colonel Harrison reviewed the behavioral reports on his desk with growing amazement. According to these notes, he's been taking therapy sessions with children at the local hospital. Since when do we have military working dogs doing pet therapy? Since Mia Chen convinced her parents to volunteer with the pediatric ward, Dr. Rodriguez replied with a smile in her voice. Apparently, Bear has a gift for calming anxious children. The hospital staff calls him a miracle worker. What the colonel didn't know was that Bear's visits to Millbrook General Hospital had become the highlight of every sick child's week. Maya would accompany him, reading stories to young patients while Bear provided silent comfort with his presence. The combination of the little girl's gentle voice and the massive dog's protective calm created an atmosphere of peace that even the most sophisticated medical equipment couldn't achieve. "Tell me about Tommy," Mia said to Bear as they walked through the hospital corridors on a Thursday afternoon. She had learned to read Bear's subtle emotional signals, and she could tell he was particularly focused on one patient today. Bear led her directly to room 304, where 8-year-old Tommy Martinez lay connected to various machines, his small body dwarfed by the large hospital bed. Tommy had been in the hospital for 3 weeks following a car accident that had left him with multiple fractures and internal injuries. More concerning than his physical wounds, however, was his complete withdrawal from the world around him. He hadn't spoken since the accident, and he flinched away from any adult who tried to approach him. "Hi, Tommy," Mia said softly, settling into the chair beside his bed. "This is Bear. He wanted to meet you." Tommy's eyes flicked toward Bear, but quickly returned to staring at the ceiling. The boy's mother, Maria Martinez, sat in the corner of the room with dark circles under her eyes, exhaustion written across every line of her face.
"He hasn't said a word since the accident," Maria whispered to Mia. "The doctors say there's nothing physically wrong with his voice, but he just won't talk to anyone."
Bear approached Tommy's bed slowly, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. Instead of trying to get the boy's attention, he simply lay down beside the bed and rested his chin on the mattress near Tommy's hand. He didn't move, didn't demand interaction, just offered his presence as a source of comfort. For nearly an hour, Mia read from a book about brave knights and loyal dogs, while Bear maintained his vigil beside Tommy's bed. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Tommy's rigid posture began to relax. His breathing became deeper, and his fingers, which had been clenched into fists, gradually opened. Then, without warning, Tommy's small hand moved across the blanket and touched Bear's head. The contact was brief, barely a whisper of skin against fur, but Bear's tail gave a single, gentle wag in acknowledgement. "He likes you," Tommy whispered, his voice so soft that Maria gasped and nearly dropped the cup of coffee she had been holding. "Tommy!" Maria cried, rushing to her son's bedside. "You spoke! Oh, sweetheart, you spoke!" But Tommy wasn't looking at his mother. His eyes were fixed on Bear, and for the first time since the accident, there was a spark of life in them. "Is he a police dog?" Tommy asked Mia. "He used to be a soldier dog," Mia explained, "but now he helps people feel better when they're scared or hurt." "Like me?" Tommy asked. "Just like you," Mia confirmed. "Bear knows what it's like to be hurt and scared, but he also knows that it gets better, especially when you have friends to help you." Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the pediatric psychologist who had been working with Tommy, witnessed this breakthrough from the doorway. She had tried every technique in her considerable arsenal to get Tommy to respond, but it had taken a 5-year-old girl and a former military dog to accomplish what weeks of professional therapy couldn't. "This is remarkable," Dr. Walsh murmured to Maria. "In all my years of practice, I've never seen such an immediate response to animal therapy." But Mia knew it wasn't just animal therapy. It was something deeper, something that happened when broken souls recognized each other and offered healing through simple presence and understanding. Bear had found his calling not as a weapon of war, but as an instrument of peace. Word of Bear's therapeutic abilities spread quickly through the hospital, and soon Mia and Bear were visiting multiple patients each week. There was Sarah, a teenage cancer patient who found the courage to face chemotherapy after Bear lay with her during her treatments. There was elderly Mr. Patterson, whose dementia symptoms seemed to ease whenever Bear visited, bringing back memories of the German Shepherd he had owned as a young man. Each success strengthened the bond between Mia and Bear, but it also attracted attention from unexpected quarters. The local news station wanted to do a feature story. Animal therapy organizations reached out about training programs. And most surprisingly, the military began to take notice of Bear's transformation. "I've been reviewing the hospital reports," Colonel Harrison told Dr. Rodriguez during their final evaluation meeting. "What this dog is accomplishing in civilian therapy work is extraordinary. We might want to consider incorporating similar programs into our veteran support services." "You're thinking of using Bear as a model for other retired military working dogs?" Dr. Rodriguez asked. "I'm thinking that maybe we've been approaching PTSD recovery all wrong," Colonel Harrison admitted. "Instead of trying to fix our damaged warriors, maybe we should be helping them find new ways to serve." The final day of Bear's evaluation period arrived with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Mia had tried to prepare herself for the possibility that the military might still reclaim Bear, despite all the positive reports. She sat in Rose's living room, holding Bear close while they waited for Colonel Harrison's final decision. "Whatever happens," she whispered to Bear, "we'll always be connected. Nobody can take that away from us." Bear seemed to sense the importance of the moment. He sat perfectly still beside Mia, his alert eyes focused on the door as if he could will the colonel to arrive with good news. When the knock finally came, Rose answered it to find not just Colonel Harrison, but also Dr. Rodriguez, Detective Walsh, and a woman Mia had never seen before. The stranger was middle-aged with kind eyes and a warm smile, dressed in civilian clothes, but carrying herself with military bearing. "This is Dr. Catherine Hayes," Colonel Harrison announced as the group entered the living room. "She's the director of the new military working dog retirement program that we're launching based on Bear's success here." Dr. Hayes knelt down to Mia's level, her voice gentle but professional. "Mia, I've read all the reports about you and Bear. What you two have accomplished together is going to help a lot of other dogs and their new families." "Does that mean Bear gets to stay with us?" Mia asked, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "It means more than that," Colonel Harrison said, his stern demeanor softening as he looked at the little girl and the dog who had changed everything. "Bear is officially being retired from military service with full honors. He'll receive veteran benefits, medical care, and most importantly, he gets to choose where he wants to spend the rest of his life." As if he understood every word, Bear stood up and walked to each adult in the room, greeting them politely but without enthusiasm. Then he returned to Mia's side and sat down, his message clear to everyone present. "I think he's made his choice," Dr. Hayes said with a smile. "Congratulations, Mia. You've just adopted a war hero." The celebration that followed was joyful but brief, interrupted by a phone call that would test Bear's newfound peace in ways none of them could have anticipated. Detective Walsh answered her cell phone and stepped outside to take the call, but when she returned, her face was grim. "We have a problem," she announced. "Frank Morrison escaped from county lockup 3 hours ago. He overpowered 2 guards and stole a vehicle. We think he might be heading this way." The atmosphere in the room changed instantly from celebration to alarm. Morrison had made threats during his interrogation, swearing revenge against the mutt and the little brat who had ruined his plans. The police had dismissed his rantings as the desperate words of a cornered criminal, but his escape changed everything. "He knows where we live," Rose said, her voice tight with fear. "He followed us home that first day." "We're posting units around the house," Detective Walsh assured them, "and we've issued an APB for Morrison and the stolen vehicle. He won't get far." But Bear was already moving, his body language shifting from relaxed companion to alert protector. He positioned himself between Mia and the front door, his ears perked forward and his nose twitching as he tested the air for any sign of danger. "He senses something," Dr. Hayes observed. "His training is kicking in." "What kind of training?" David asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "Combat tracking and neutralization," Colonel Harrison replied grimly. "Bear was trained to find and stop dangerous individuals. If Morrison comes anywhere near this house, Bear will know about it long before we do." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of breaking glass came from somewhere in the back of the house. Bear's reaction was immediate and terrifying. He let out a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from the depths of his soul, and moved toward the source of the disturbance with deadly purpose. "Everyone stay together," Detective Walsh ordered, drawing her weapon. "Colonel, can you control the dog?" "Nobody controls Bear," Mia said, standing up despite her parents' attempts to keep her seated. "But he'll listen to me." Before anyone could stop her, Mia walked after Bear, ignoring the adult's frantic whispers behind her. She found him in the kitchen, every muscle coiled and ready to spring, staring at the back door where the glass had been shattered. "I know you want to protect us," Mia whispered to Bear, placing her small hand on his powerful shoulder. "But you don't have to be a soldier anymore. You can let the police handle the bad man." Bear looked at her, conflict clear in his dark eyes. His training told him to pursue and neutralize the threat, but his heart told him to stay with Mia and keep her safe. The struggle between his past and his present played out in the tension of his muscles and the rapid rise and fall of his breathing. A shadow moved past the broken door, and Morrison's face appeared at the opening. He was dirty, desperate, and carrying what looked like a crowbar in his right hand. His eyes were wild with rage and the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose. "There's the little brat and her mutt," Morrison snarled, starting to climb through the window. "Time to finish what I started." That's when Bear made his choice. Instead of attacking Morrison directly, he stepped in front of Mia and let out a bark so loud and commanding that it shook the windows. The sound was not aggressive but authoritative, the bark of a dog who was claiming his territory and warning an intruder to retreat. Morrison hesitated, clearly unprepared for such a confident response. In his mind, Bear had been a lucky stray who had stumbled onto his campsite. He hadn't expected to face a trained military working dog who knew exactly how dangerous he was. "Get back!" Morrison shouted, raising the crowbar threateningly. "I'll bash your head in, you stupid mutt!" But Bear didn't retreat. Instead, he began to advance slowly, his head low and his eyes locked on Morrison's weapon. This was what he had been trained for, reading an opponent's intentions, calculating distance and timing, preparing for the moment when action would be necessary. Detective Walsh and the other adults burst into the kitchen just as Morrison swung the crowbar at Bear's head, but the dog was ready for the attack, dodging with fluid grace and lunging forward to grab Morrison's wrist in his powerful jaws. The crowbar clattered to the floor as Morrison screamed in pain and fear. Bear held him immobilized but didn't increase the pressure of his bite, a testament to his training and self-control. He had neutralized the threat without causing unnecessary harm, exactly as he had been taught years ago in a very different kind of conflict. "Release," Mia said softly, and Bear immediately let go of Morrison's wrist, stepping back to allow Detective Walsh to handcuff the would-be intruder. As Morrison was led away, cursing and making threats that nobody took seriously anymore, the reality of what had just happened settled over the room. Bear had faced his first real test as a civilian protector, and he had passed with flying colors. "That was textbook threat neutralization," Colonel Harrison said with obvious pride. "Bear may be retired from military service, but he's still one hell of a soldier." "No," Mia corrected, scratching behind Bear's ears as he settled down beside her. "He's not a soldier anymore. He's my best friend who knows how to keep us safe." The distinction was important, and everyone in the room understood it. Bear hadn't acted out of military programming or violent instinct. He had acted out of love for his new family, using his skills not to destroy but to protect. As the police finished securing the scene and the last of the official visitors prepared to leave, Dr. Hayes approached Mia one final time. "You know, there are other children out there who could benefit from what you and Bear do together. Would you be interested in helping us train other retired military dogs for therapy work?" Mia looked up at Bear, and in that silent communication they had perfected, she received his answer. "We'd like that," she said. "There are probably lots of scared kids and sad dogs who need to find each other." The last words spoken that evening came from Colonel Harrison as he prepared to leave Rose's house for the final time. "Sergeant Matthews would have been proud," he said to Bear, rendering a crisp military salute to the dog who had served with honor and found peace. Bear's tail wagged once in acknowledgement, but his attention was already focused on tomorrow's hospital visit and the children who would be waiting for him. The warrior had become a healer, and his story was just beginning. What do you think Bear's first day as an official therapy dog will bring? Share your thoughts below. 6 months later, the transformation in both Mia and Bear was nothing short of miraculous. What had begun as a chance encounter outside a grocery store had evolved into something that touched lives across the entire state. The military working dog retirement program that Dr. Hayes had mentioned was now a reality, with Bear and Mia serving as the flagship team that proved traumatized veterans, both human and canine, could find new purpose in healing others. "Room 312 is asking for you specifically," Nurse Patricia Williams told Mia as she and Bear arrived at Millbrook General Hospital on a crisp autumn morning. "Little Jamie is having surgery tomorrow, and her parents think a visit from Bear might help calm her nerves." Mia nodded seriously, understanding the weight of responsibility that came with their work. At nearly 6 years old now, she had developed a maturity and empathy that amazed the hospital staff. Her ability to connect with frightened children, combined with Bear's intuitive understanding of human emotion, had made them the most requested therapy team in the hospital's history. "Is she the one who's afraid of the dark?" Mia asked, adjusting the small backpack she always carried on their hospital visits. "That's right," Nurse Williams confirmed. "She's been having nightmares about the surgery, and she won't sleep without all the lights on. Her parents are exhausted." Bear seemed to understand the conversation, his pace quickening slightly as they approached Jamie's room. Inside, they found a 7-year-old girl clutching a worn stuffed elephant, her eyes wide with the kind of fear that no child should have to experience. "Hi, Jamie," Mia said softly, settling into the familiar routine that had become second nature to her. "This is Bear. He heard you might be feeling scared, and he wanted to meet you." Jamie's parents, Mark and Susan Chen, no relation to Mia's family despite the shared surname, watched from the corner of the room with expressions of desperate hope. Their daughter hadn't slept properly in weeks, and the stress was taking a toll on the entire family. "He's really big," Jamie whispered, though her voice held more wonder than fear. "He is big," Mia agreed, "but that just means he has more room in his heart for caring about people. Would you like to know a secret about Bear?" Jamie nodded, her grip on the stuffed elephant loosening slightly. "Bear used to be afraid of the dark too," Mia continued, settling cross-legged on the floor beside Jamie's bed. "When he was a soldier, something really scary happened to him in the dark, and for a long time, he couldn't sleep either." This wasn't entirely true. Bear's trauma had been related to explosions and loss rather than darkness specifically. But Mia had learned to adapt the truth in ways that helped children relate to Bear's experiences. The core message remained the same. Healing was possible, even from the deepest fears. "How did he stop being scared?" Jamie asked, her eyes moving between Mia and Bear. "He learned that darkness isn't scary when you have someone you trust nearby," Mia explained. "And he learned that sometimes the things we're most afraid of turn out to be not so bad after all." Bear approached Jamie's bed slowly, his movements deliberate and calming. Instead of trying to get her attention, he simply lay down on the floor where she could see him and closed his eyes, demonstrating the kind of peaceful rest that Jamie desperately needed. "Watch this," Mia whispered, reaching into her backpack and pulling out a small flashlight. She dimmed the room's overhead lights and turned on the flashlight, creating a warm, gentle glow that danced across the ceiling. "Bear taught me that a little bit of light can make any darkness feel safe." As Mia moved the flashlight to create patterns of light and shadow on the walls, Bear remained perfectly still, his breathing deep and even. The combination of the gentle light show and the big dog's peaceful presence began to work its magic on Jamie. "He really isn't scared anymore?" Jamie asked, her voice growing drowsy. "Not when he has friends with him," Mia confirmed. "And you know what? Tomorrow when you have your surgery, Bear and I will be thinking about you the whole time. We'll send you all our brave thoughts." Can I pet him?" Jamie asked hesitantly. "Bear would love that," Mia said. And the German Shepherd slowly rose and approached the bed, tail wagging gently. As Jamie's small hand touched Bear's soft fur, something remarkable happened. The tension that had been holding her small body rigid for weeks suddenly began to release. Her breathing deepened, her shoulders relaxed, and for the first time in memory, she looked genuinely peaceful. "I think I might be able to sleep now," Jamie murmured, her eyelids growing heavy. Mark and Susan exchanged looks of amazement and gratitude. In 20 minutes, Mia and Bear had accomplished what weeks of medical intervention and parental comfort hadn't been able to achieve. "How do you do it?" Susan whispered to Mia as they prepared to leave. "How do you always know exactly what to say?" Mia considered the question seriously. "I don't think I do know what to say," she admitted, "but Bear helps me understand what people are feeling, and then the right words just come." It was this intuitive connection between Mia and Bear that had caught the attention of researchers and therapists from around the country. Dr. Rachel Stevens, a prominent child psychologist from the State University, had been studying their partnership for 3 months, trying to understand the mechanisms behind their extraordinary success rate. "Traditional therapy takes time to build trust and rapport," Dr. Stevens explained to a room full of medical professionals during a conference presentation. But Mia and Bear seemed to bypass those initial barriers entirely. Children open up to them immediately, often sharing fears and concerns they haven't expressed to their own parents. The presentation included video footage of Mia and Bear's sessions with various patients, always with proper consent and privacy protections. The audience watched in amazement as child after child found comfort and courage in the presence of the unusual therapy team. "What's most remarkable," Dr. Stevens continued, "is that the benefits seem to extend beyond the immediate interaction. Children who spend time with Mia and Bear show improved sleep patterns, reduced anxiety, and better cooperation with medical procedures for weeks afterward. But the success of their therapy work was only part of the story. The bond between Mia and Bear had continued to deepen in ways that challenged conventional understanding of human-animal relationships. Rose, who had become Bear's official guardian to handle the legal aspects of his care, often watched in amazement as the two seemed to communicate without words. "Sometimes I catch them just staring at each other," Rose told Dr. Rodriguez during one of Bear's regular checkups. Not in a playful way, but like they're having a serious conversation, and then they'll both get up and do something together, as if they've reached some kind of agreement. Dr. Rodriguez had witnessed this phenomenon herself during their visits. There's definitely an unusual level of synchronization between them, she agreed. Their brain patterns, when we've monitored them during therapy sessions, show remarkable similarity. It's as if they're operating on the same emotional wavelength. This synchronization had practical benefits that extended far beyond therapy work. Bear had become extraordinarily attuned to Mia's needs and emotions, often anticipating her reactions before she was consciously aware of them herself. When Mia was tired, Bear would guide her to a comfortable place to rest. When she was anxious about something, he would provide comfort before her distress became obvious to others. The relationship worked both ways. Mia had developed an uncanny ability to read Bear's physical and emotional state, often alerting Dr. Rodriguez to minor health issues before they became serious problems. She had correctly identified an ear infection, a minor dietary intolerance, and even a small cut on Bear's paw that had been hidden beneath his thick fur. "It's like they share one consciousness between two bodies," David observed to Linda one evening as they watched Mia and Bear work together on a puzzle, with Bear somehow indicating which pieces Mia should try next. "Do you think that's normal?" Linda asked, though she wasn't sure what normal meant anymore when it came to their daughter and her extraordinary companion. The specialness of their bond was about to be tested in ways none of them could have anticipated. Dr. Hayes called Rose on a Thursday evening with news that would challenge everything they thought they understood about Bear's past and future. "We've been contacted by the Department of Veterans Affairs," Dr. Hayes explained over the phone. "They want to feature Bear and Mia in a national campaign about innovative veteran therapy programs. It would involve traveling to various military bases and veteran facilities around the country." Rose felt a familiar knot of anxiety form in her stomach. What kind of traveling, and for how long? The initial tour would be 6 weeks, visiting 12 different locations, Dr. Hayes continued. Bear would be working with human veterans who are struggling with PTSD, and Mia would be helping to demonstrate the therapy techniques they have developed. The opportunity was enormous, a chance to help countless veterans while bringing national attention to the importance of military working dog retirement programs. But it would also mean taking a 6-year-old child away from her normal life and routine for an extended period. "I'll need to discuss this with David and Linda," Rose said carefully. "This is a big decision for all of us." "Of course," Dr. Hayes agreed. "But Rose, you should know that some of the veterans we're hoping to help are in critical condition. Traditional therapy isn't working for them, and several facilities have specifically requested Bear after hearing about his success with civilian patients." That evening, the family gathered in Rose's living room to discuss the proposal. Mia sat quietly with Bear beside her, seeming to understand that the adults were discussing something important that would affect both of them. 6 weeks is a long time to be away from home, Linda said, voicing the concern they all felt. And Mia would miss 6 weeks of school. "But think about how many people we could help," David countered. "If Bear and Mia can do for veterans what they've done for the children at the hospital—" "It's not just about helping people," Rose interjected. "It's about whether this is the right thing for Mia. She's still a little girl, regardless of how mature and capable she seems." All eyes turned to Mia, who had been listening to the discussion with the serious expression she wore when processing important information. Finally, she looked up at the adults and then down at Bear. "What do you think?" she asked Bear quietly. "Do you want to help the soldier people who are sad like you used to be?" Bear's response was immediate and clear. He stood up, walked to the front door, and looked back at Mia expectantly, as if ready to leave immediately for their new mission. "I think he's saying yes," Mia said with a small smile. "And I think I'm saying yes too, but only if Bear and I can stay together the whole time, and only if we can come home whenever we want to." Dr. Hayes, when informed of their decision, was thrilled but careful to set appropriate boundaries. Mia will have a full-time tutor to keep up with her schoolwork, and either Rose or her parents will accompany her at all times. This isn't about putting pressure on a child. It's about letting a natural gift flourish in a controlled environment. The first stop on their tour was Fort Campbell, Kentucky, the same base where Bear had begun his military career years earlier. Colonel Harrison, who had since been promoted and transferred to the Pentagon, made a special trip to welcome them back. "It's fitting that Bear's new chapter begins where his old one started," Colonel Harrison said, as he watched Mia and Bear explore the base that had once been Bear's home. Sergeant Matthews would have loved seeing this. Their first patient was Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, a decorated veteran who had lost both legs in an IED explosion 6 months earlier. Miguel had been struggling with severe depression and hadn't spoken to anyone outside of mandatory therapy sessions for weeks. "He's been asking to be left alone," the base counselor, Captain Sarah Williams, explained to Mia before their session. "He feels like he's not the same person he was before his injury, and he doesn't see the point in trying to get better." Mia nodded with the gravity of someone much older than her 6 years. Bear felt like that too, after his soldier friend died. Sometimes people forget who they are when something really bad happens. The meeting between Miguel and Bear was electric with recognition. Miguel had worked with military dogs during his deployment, and he immediately understood that Bear was no ordinary therapy animal. The German Shepherd approached the wheelchair-bound veteran with a respect and dignity that spoke to their shared experience of service and sacrifice. "You're military, aren't you, boy?" Miguel said, the first words he had spoken voluntarily in weeks. Bear sat at attention and offered his paw, not a cute trick, but a gesture of respect between warriors. "He was a soldier like you," Mia explained, settling into the chair beside Miguel's wheelchair. "His name is Bear, and he knows what it's like to get hurt while doing important work." For the next hour, Mia facilitated a conversation between Miguel and Bear that was unlike anything the base counselors had ever witnessed. Without using technical psychological terms or formal therapy techniques, Mia helped Miguel understand that his identity wasn't defined by his physical limitations, but by his capacity to serve others. "Bear can't do some of the things he used to do," Mia explained, "but he found new ways to help people. Maybe you could find new ways too." By the end of the session, Miguel was sitting straighter in his wheelchair and had made eye contact with the counselors for the first time since his arrival at the base. More importantly, he had agreed to continue meeting with Bear and Mia during their week-long stay. "I've been doing this for 15 years, Captain Williams told Dr. Hayes after the session. "I've never seen such immediate progress with a patient this resistant to treatment." The success with Miguel was repeated at base after base, veteran facility after veteran facility. Bear and Mia worked with Marines who had lost limbs, airmen struggling with survivor's guilt, soldiers dealing with traumatic brain injuries, and countless others who had been forgotten or written off by traditional therapy programs. Each interaction was different, but the pattern was the same. Bear's presence communicated to the veterans that he understood their experiences in ways that civilian therapists never could, and Mia's innocent wisdom helped them see paths forward that their own trauma-clouded vision had missed. "The child doesn't just talk to them," observed Dr. Patricia Stone, a VA psychologist who had been following their tour. "She listens to them with a depth that's remarkable for someone her age. And the dog. It's like he can sense exactly what each veteran needs, whether it's gentle comfort or firm encouragement." But the tour was taking its toll on Mia. By the 4th week, Rose noticed that her granddaughter was more tired than usual, and her normally cheerful demeanor had become subdued. The weight of absorbing so much pain and trauma from others was beginning to affect her own emotional well-being. "Maybe we should consider cutting the tour short," Rose suggested to Dr. Hayes during a private conversation. "Mia is dealing with more psychological stress than any 6-year-old should have to handle." Dr. Hayes was reluctant to end the tour early, given its unprecedented success, but she agreed that Mia's welfare had to come first. "Let's finish this week and then take a break," she decided. "We can reassess whether to continue based on how Mia feels after some rest." But Mia had other plans. That evening, as she and Bear sat together in their hotel room, she made a decision that would surprise all of the adults who were trying to protect her. "We're going to finish what we started," she told Bear quietly. "All of these soldiers need us, and we can't let them down just because I'm tired." Bear seemed to understand the weight of her decision. He moved closer to her and rested his head in her lap, offering his strength to supplement her own. In that moment, the true nature of their partnership became clear. They weren't just a little girl and her dog. They were partners in the deepest sense, sharing both the burden and the joy of their unique calling. The final 2 weeks of the tour were the most challenging yet, but also the most rewarding. Mia found reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed, while Bear became even more attuned to her needs, ensuring she got rest when she needed it and comfort when the emotional weight became too heavy. Their last stop was Walter Reed Medical Center, where they worked with veterans facing the most severe psychological trauma. It was here that they met Colonel James Patterson, a career officer who had been medically retired after suffering a complete psychological breakdown following his third deployment. "I've been to every specialist, tried every treatment," Colonel Patterson told them honestly. "I'm here because my wife insisted, but I don't expect this to be any different from everything else that hasn't worked." Mia looked at the exhausted man sitting across from her and saw something that the doctors had missed. "You're not broken," she said simply. "You're just carrying too much by yourself." It was the beginning of a breakthrough that would become legendary in veteran therapy circles. Over the course of 3 sessions, Mia and Bear helped Colonel Patterson understand that seeking help wasn't a sign of weakness, but a continuation of the leadership he had shown throughout his military career. "A good leader takes care of his soldiers," Mia reminded him during their final session, "but sometimes leaders need to be taken care of too." By the time they left Walter Reed, Colonel Patterson had not only made remarkable progress in his own recovery, but had also volunteered to help establish similar therapy programs at other veteran facilities. The tour ended with a ceremony at the Pentagon, where Bear was awarded the Department of Defense Medal for Distinguished Public Service, the highest civilian honor the military can bestow. Mia, standing beside her faithful partner, accepted the medal on Bear's behalf with a maturity and grace that brought tears to the eyes of seasoned military officers. "Bear and I don't need medals," Mia said in her brief acceptance speech. "We just need to know that we've helped people remember that they're not alone." As they prepared to return home to their quiet life in Millbrook, both Mia and Bear carried with them the knowledge that their story was far from over. They had touched hundreds of lives and proven that healing could come from the most unexpected sources. But the greatest healing had happened within themselves. Bear had found a purpose that honored his military service while embracing his new identity as a protector and healer. And Mia had discovered that her special gift for understanding both animals and people was not just a childhood phase, but a calling that would shape the rest of her life. The last image of their tour was captured by a Pentagon photographer, a 6-year-old girl walking hand in paw with a decorated war veteran, both of them heading toward whatever adventure awaited them next. It was a picture that would inspire countless others to believe in the healing power of unlikely friendships. Can you imagine what new challenge Mia and Bear will face when they return home? Drop your predictions in the comments. If this incredible story of love, healing, and second chances touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear about hope, subscribe to our channel for more amazing true stories, and let us know in the comments below where you're watching from and which part of Mia and Bear's journey moved you most. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories like this one to people around the world who need reminders that miracles still happen when we open our hearts to unexpected friendships.